How long have you been with Corvette?
19 years, over 19 years. Yep, came shortly after Dave Hill came on board, and he kind of opened the doors for other people to join the team. And at that point, the C5 was just starting to get put together. You know, it had been kind of a concept before that, and it was just starting to get serious and get ready for approval to go forward. McClellan retired, and Hill came in, and he needed to staff up to do this all new car, and so I was.
So actually, then C7 is your second new Corvette that you've done.
Third
yeah, new Corvette
5,
you've done.
6. So yeah, 19 years I get to do a third one.
Now the C6 though, you were there from the very beginning, the genesis of it.
Very beginning, yeah.
And now.
And really, the C5, it was barely a concept. So my first day on the job, I was practicing the sales pitch to the board of directors to get the money for the car, and Joe Spielman, who's a huge fan of Corvette, he was sitting in the audience coaching us, Dave Hill and me, on how to pound the table, and you guys got to be enthusiastic. You got to give them a deal they can't refuse. He was like talking mafia terms to get that car sold, because it had been delayed quite a few times before that. So. Yeah, that was my first job. Put together the presentation to sell this baby and get the money to do it.
Would you say that now that you've seen the C6 go its entire cycle, that it's accomplished the goals that you set out as a program to do, or would you say that we really went far beyond that?
Well, our original plan was to have a far shorter life cycle. The economy and bankruptcy and a whole bunch of things ended up interfering with the original plan. So we were supposed to have an all-new car way before we're doing it. So it more than served its use. I mean, we sold a ton of cars for the life cycle that it was planned for, and it still makes money even at the volume it's selling at today. Because the life cycle is extended, we got to do this car right here, the ZR1. That was not part of the original C6 plan. We only had a coupe convertible and the Z06 were all part of that original pitch. Once we realized we're going to have this car in production longer, we said, we got to do something more, so we ended up with ZR1, Grand Sport, 427 convertible, a whole bunch of iconic cars that never would have existed had the life cycle not been extended.
So good stuff comes out.
Good
of
stuff.
Bad news.
You get lemons, you make lemonade out of it. So.
What do you think will be the greatest accomplishment of the C6? What is the greatest accomplishment?
Greatest accomplishment of the C. Well, I think really, when we did the C5, it was kind of a reinvention of the automobile. The whole construction, the architecture, the use of materials was a reinvention. The packaging efficiency was kind of a breakthrough. No other car had ever had that kind of performance. Comfort for the occupants, space for luggage, and performance. And then when we brought out the Z06, that set a higher standard and a gold standard for performance. But that performance bar got raised exponentially on the C6, because we took, the Z06 on the C5 was kind of an afterthought. It was based on a car that we didn't know what to do with. It was going to be the low-cost car, so we made a Z06 out of it. And, it turned out to be quite successful, and people really appreciate it. But then when we were starting from scratch and knew we were going to have a Z06 in the program, we really got to think it through when we did the aluminum frame and more carbon fiber, and 427 spins to 7,000 RPM. So that set the performance bar really high. And then bringing out the ZR1, which arguably is the world's fastest, most capable mass production vehicle. I mean, there are some cars that can challenge a ZR1, but you can't really say they're mass production. So here's a car designed in Michigan, built in Kentucky, sold in volume all around the world, that's right up there in the argument for one of the world's fastest cars. So I think that's probably the C6 is, getting that performance expectation where it doesn't matter what you own, a Lambo, a Ferrari. The question is, you sure can beat a ZR1? On an even track, level playing field, are you sure it's going to be faster? You're not really sure. I mean, it's right in there in the mix.
Looking back on the program, is there anything that you would have done differently, you think? And I'm not talking about like with the delays and stuff like that, but just looking at the car now and not even knowing what you know now, looking back, we should have done this, or we would like to have seen that.
Well, if we'd known the life cycle was going to be as long as it was, we probably would have made the seats, upgraded the seats earlier in the life cycle, paid a little more attention to the interior, little things like that. Nothing very big. The car really did well for itself over its life.
What's interesting when you look at C6 and that there's so many different models, and not only the models, but then you have the special editions, the competition sport, and the GT1.
Sure.
And is there one of those that kind of stands out in your mind of that was a really cool car?
Well, I actually like the GT1, and it ended up selling in very small volume, partly because that was, right on the cusp of the collapse and the timing that car was brought out. And we were in a position where we were winning Le Mans but couldn't say anything about it, things like that, because the whole world's distorted as the economy starts to collapse. So that car looks really cool, and I think will be a collectible car someday. And then I think the 427 convertible, people will look back 20, 30 years from now and say, man, I wish I'd bought one of those.
Well, talking about 2008 and 2009, the Corvette-pocalypse, was there really, I mean, obviously everything was on the table, but did you really feel like, oh God, this is it, Corvette's gone?
Everybody in the whole auto industry felt like we could enter a chaotic collapse. It was that bad where we weren't sure of getting paid, we weren't sure of having a job. There was times where we weren't sure we'd come in to find the doors locked, and you don't need to report into work today. So it wasn't just Corvette, it was everything. But of course, as we went through bankruptcy, the question, you heard a lot in the public, people saying, well, the reason General Motors wasn't successful is they didn't have a high efficiency small car. So when you hear the government saying things like that, you think, if the government's going to be involved, are they going to say, well, there's no room in the future for cars that are fun? Never mind that the car gets great fuel economy for what it is. It's not part of the environmental equation. It's 100% recyclable. All Corvettes get recycled into new Corvettes as they're restored. So it's not really part of the ecological argument. But still, it just politically, we were worried that it just didn't look that good. But the truth is, Treasury Department was good for us. The Treasury Department came in, looked at the books, looked at the profitability of this car, looked at, a flagship car. And to be honest, there's some Corvette geeks. I was on a conference call. Yeah, I was on a conference call with these consultants trying to assess the business, very serious. Is this business any good? And so, we all introduced ourselves around the room, who's on the call. I introduced myself, and the next thing I hear is, can you tell us about the C7? It's the exact same question I get at Corvette events. So here I am on a conference call with the Treasury Department, and somebody's bugging me about the C7. So actually, the whole process ended up pretty early. We realized we were going to be okay.
Well, today is the day that you can talk about the C7.
A little bit, yes.
And you brought an emblem with you.
I did.
And tell us about, you said there's only 2 parts that made the carryover from C6 to C7. What are
yes, and that's of course excluding commodities and fat, stuff that's in every car like nuts and bolts and clips, washers and little rubber bumpers and adhesives and seal. There's a million things that are in pretty much every car. So excluding those, purpose-built, designed for the C6, the number of things that are carried over to C7 is 2 parts. So it's the filter that goes in and filters the air coming into the cabin for your air conditioning and your heat. So that filter element is a very large filter element, still very good, still state of the art, so we kept that. And then the little handle that holds the removable roof in the back. So we're disclosing more than just those 2 parts. The fact that we have a handle that's to a removable roof tells you we're keeping that feature. So that's kind of announcement that we're making today.
So you could make the assumption that the frame would be all new because it's...
You can make the assumption the chassis is all new, the body structure is all new, the powertrain is all new, the interior is all new, the exterior is all new, and the electrical system is all new. That's not an assumption, that's a conclusion, because every other part is different. And that's the parts going into Bowling Green assembly plant. So that's how we look at it. The parts that you see coming in have been redesigned, virtually every one. Of the thousands of parts that go in there, virtually every one has been changed in some way to bring it up to 21st century engineering.
And next week we're going to hear a little bit more about the engine?
Next week there's a discussion plan with the media to talk about the next generation, the heart of the beast, the engine. We kind of wanted to, there's so much news, because I said everything's new, we kind of wanted to get the engine out ahead of the cars so people understand that story. And obviously the Corvette is the flagship version of the next generation small block. but there's a whole bunch of applications, including trucks and others, that'll use a variant of that. And so everybody wants to know about the engine. So we said, okay, well, we'll tell them about the engine first. At least they'll have that part of the way, and then we tell them about the whole rest of the car in January.
Well, you know, we've seen some of the leaks on the C7, and of course the spy photographers are all over this car once it's on the public streets. How have times changed from C5 to C6 and now C7 in trying to keep your stuff close to the vest compared to previous cars?
Well, it's so much harder with the prevalence of cell phones, with video, with everybody, every human practically in the U.S. is capable of recording anything they see, and so we can't go anywhere without being spotted. We know we're going to be spotted, so we try to take precautions, not because we want to deny everybody the information, but we've got current cars to sell.
Right.
We want to have it newsworthy when the car comes out, so if everybody already knows everything about it, you wouldn't be interviewing me now. If you already knew everything,
right,
you wouldn't be interviewing me now. So as the car comes out, we want it to be newsworthy, so all the media around the world are hungry for the stories and give it, kind of top drawer coverage, so that the whole rest of the world can learn about the car at the same time, instead of just the people who are super interested in the Corvette.
Well, I saw too in the release you're going to be kind of feeding that beast with the new website, the 11313.com.
Yeah, we're trying to, we're starting to count down as of today. It's the first time we've said anything specific about the reveal. So the clock starts now, and we talked about the engine. We're going to try to let people in on a few other little tidbits to keep them occupied, waiting until
off
our back. No, it doesn't help because I can show them the emblem. I show people the emblem, and it satisfies them for about 2 seconds, and then they're asking me about something else. So it doesn't last very long. So if we can at least keep the conversation going with some other interesting tidbits, we're going to try to do that.
Well, we're so interested in the car, and we just want to thank you, and please relay our thanks to all the people that you work with.
Yes.
So appreciative of all the work you've done. The people that own Corvettes, they love them, they love the car, they love everybody that works with them, and so there's a sense of family there. And so we just wanted to say thanks for all the hard work you're doing in preparation for the release of the new car.
Well, I'll accept your thanks on behalf of everybody, literally thousands of people all across the country and actually across the world, mostly in Michigan, mostly in Kentucky, but they're spread out. There's Corvette contributors all around the world who've done something or other to help this 7th generation turn into a reality.
All right, well, Tadge, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. My pleasure.